Just 600 miles off the Philippine coast, a classified drone vanished. Mid-transmission right, after capturing footage of a glowing humanoid figure walking calmly across the ocean floor. Welcome to Mystery Con. In April 2025, marine biologist Dr. Elena Vargas led a covert dive near a restricted trench zone in the western Philippine Sea. Her mission followed leaked sonar data showing massive artificial structures hidden under the seabed, structures ignored or erased by international agencies. The dive exposed a live surveillance network, alien-like energy systems, and potential proof of ancient underwater civilizations. High-frequency pulses, bioluminescent signals, and impossible architecture confirmed what governments have long denied. We are not alone, and the ocean is hiding more than nature. If this network is real and active, it means entire military and scientific communities have been lying about deep-sea discoveries for decades, with signs of global powers racing to extract or weaponize the tech. This isn't just about science fiction anymore. It's about who controls the next world order, and whether some secrets were buried to protect us or to control us. If you enjoy true conspiracy stories based on real-world evidence, consider liking the video, subscribing, and tapping the bell so you never miss what they don't want you to hear. Now, let's get into it. The ocean doesn't just swallow ships, silences questions, and when I heard that transmission, I knew someone didn't want it heard again. Most people don't realize how little we understand about the ocean. We've mapped more of the surface of Mars than the seafloor. That kind of ignorance breeds comfort, lets the world keep assuming nothing important is down there. But I've spent most of my adult life staring into sonar readouts and acoustic anomalies. And let me tell you, what we don't know is exactly what we should be afraid of. My name is Dr. Elena Vargas. I'm a marine biologist with a background in deep-sea ecosystems and neuroacoustic communication in aquatic mammals, the kind of specialization that gets UNICEF grunts, not attention. That changed last fall. It started with the Dorian wave, a privately funded research vessel on a 2-month survey near the western slope of the Mariana Trench. Its mission was routine mapping, thermal vents, collecting sediment cores, tracking microbial activity. I'd reviewed some of their sample data just weeks before they disappeared. No distress calls, no mechanical failure warnings, no anomalies logged by maritime traffic control, just silence. One day they were pinging their coordinates like clockwork. The next, nothing. Officially, it was labeled a systems failure, followed by probable implosion due to pressure breach. Unrecoverable. A tragedy, but not an uncommon one for vessels operating at those depths. That's what they told the families. That's what made the papers. But that wasn't the end of it. 5 days after the Dorian wave went dark, I was going through archived hydroacoustic recordings when I noticed something strange. An encrypted frequency blip, registered by a seismographic station on Guam. The file was buried in secondary metadata, something only someone like me would stumble onto. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably human. A compressed digital packet buried in white noise. I ran a decryption script out of habit. What came through was fragmented, but not meaningless. A scrambled voice repeating, "Artifact breached, coordinates masked." We were not alone. Then static, then silence. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. I wanted to believe it was a hoax or corrupted data. I wanted to believe the story I'd been fed like everyone else. But that signal kept clawing at my mind. I checked every sonar archive within a 1,000-mile radius of the Mariana site. I found 3 more anomalies, all within 12 hours of the Dorian's last ping. Each one encoded, each one cut short. Someone had tried to get a message out. Someone who knew they wouldn't get another chance. The ocean is quiet in a way that makes you uneasy. Sound travels farther there than almost anywhere else on Earth. It carries secrets if you know how to listen. And in those hours I spent piecing together garbled noise, I felt something shift. The patterns weren't just strange, they were directed, like someone or something was speaking from below, just beneath the edge of our comprehension. That's when I knew the Dorian wave hadn't vanished by accident. It had found something, and whatever it was had been buried deep for a reason. I didn't go back to my regular research after that signal. I couldn't. Instead, I filed a formal request for access to archival seafloor mapping data from the Dorian's last known survey grid. The request was denied without explanation. That was my first official wall. So I went around it. A friend at NOAA owed me a favor. Within a day, I had access to sonar imaging that hadn't been included in the public logs. The moment I saw it, I understood why. Roughly 40 nautical miles east of the trench rim, the sonar image revealed a jagged undersea ridge with a sudden, unnatural curve perfectly symmetrical, almost architectural. Embedded in its side was something metallic, not scattered wreckage or geological debris. This had edges, uniform density, and a reflective signature inconsistent with natural rock formations. A structure, or at least part of one. I chartered a private submersible through an independent contractor operating out of Palau. The pilot was ex-Navy, discreet, and didn't ask questions. We descended under cover of night, avoiding formal traffic channels. By dawn, we were at depth. The cave system near the sonar anomaly appeared quickly larger than expected, wider than it should have been at that pressure. Inside, my readings went haywire. Compass, drift, electrical interference, even slight fluctuations in ambient pressure. Something down there was interfering with our instruments. We moved slowly into the first chamber. The walls weren't natural. They were lined with a metallic alloy, dull grey, seamless. I pressed my glove to one of them. Cold, colder than the surrounding water. There were markings along the surface geometry, symbols etched in repeating lines, not random, and definitely not erosion. I took samples, high-resolution scans, and a single physical fragment that broke clean from the surface. Before we could finish, our systems blinked, cameras reset, navigation, controls jammed. For 20 full seconds, everything went dark. When the power returned, the readings had stabilized. But the data we just recorded was corrupted, overwritten, erased, or something else entirely. We surfaced with only fragments of what we'd seen, but even that was enough. The cave wasn't a natural formation. It was built, and someone or something had made sure we couldn't prove it. 2 days after our dive, I received a visit I hadn't expected. It was early morning. I was reviewing degraded sonar frames from the submersible's corrupted log when a black SUV pulled up outside the research center's private dock. No insignia, no warning. 2 men stepped out, dark suits, clean-cut, generic. One flashed a badge too quickly to read. The other said only, "We need to talk." They didn't ask permission. They walked me back inside and sat me down in my own office. They called themselves representatives of a federal maritime oversight task force. That agency doesn't exist. I asked what this was about. They said they had concerns about unauthorized dives in restricted waters. I told them my permits were legal. They nodded as if that didn't matter. Then one of them placed a printed image on my desk scan, enlarged scan of the metallic structure we had found. It was one of the files we thought had been wiped. This image, he said, never existed. Understand, that was the moment I realized we weren't just dealing with forgotten ruins or unexplained anomalies. Someone already knew what was down there, and they were working hard to keep the rest of us from knowing it too. They didn't arrest me. They didn't threaten me directly, but their message was clear. Stop digging. Let it go. They left without another word. 20 minutes later, my access to NOAA databases was revoked. My dive log from the Palau submersible vanished from their cloud storage. Even the payment record to the submersible contractor was deleted from my bank account statement. It was as if the dive had never happened. I tried to contact the pilot. His phone was disconnected, his website offline. A colleague in Manila who had introduced us told me, cautiously, that he had relocated. No details, just gone. And then the messages started. They came through encrypted email channels I didn't think anyone else knew I used. The first one was simple: "You're being watched." The second included a satellite image of my home, taken within the last 48 hours. The subject line read, "You are not authorized to continue this work." It wasn't paranoia anymore. I began checking under my car for trackers. I stopped using my laptop for anything other than isolated, offline analysis. I bought burner phones. I kept my movements random. Still, I couldn't let it go. If someone was trying this hard to keep it quiet, that meant the discovery was even more significant than I thought. I dug deeper, through old maritime accident reports, records, declassified Navy logs. I started noticing a pattern: routine survey vessels disappearing or reporting equipment failure near known trench systems across the Pacific. Every time, the case would be closed without real investigation. In several instances, the lead scientists on those expeditions had resigned quietly or relocated out of public life entirely. I compiled a list. There were more than 24 names. None of them responded when I reached out. Not one. But the more I looked, the more I found. Anomalies in ocean current modeling, satellite imaging that showed faint outlines of geometric shapes beneath the surface, naval exercises that appeared to coincide with civilian surveys, always ending in cancellations. A quiet war was happening beneath the waves, and no one was talking about it. Then came the final confirmation. A package arrived at my home. Number, return address. Inside was a flash drive, wrapped in plastic and taped to the inside cover of a discarded field manual. It contained internal memos from a covert agency called the Abyssal Directorate. Not a think tank, not a task force, an organization with resources, personnel, and orders to suppress discoveries like mine. One memo stood out. It referenced a containment protocol near the Mariana Trench and a directive to monitor deep site anomalies and pre-architectural evidence. The language was careful, but the implications weren't. They weren't just covering up an accident. They were actively protecting something buried. Now I knew the name of the shadow force trying to stop me. The Abyssal Directorate wasn't some distant threat. They had eyes on me, ears in my communications, and access to systems I thought were secure. But I also had something they didn't expect. Complete, fragile, but real. And I wasn't ready to disappear quietly. After confirming the existence of the Abyssal Directorate, I stopped working from home. I rented a storage unit on the edge of town and converted it into a makeshift research space. No internet, no phone signal, no traceable devices. I powered everything from a portable generator and used old field laptops I'd disconnected from every network I'd ever used. It wasn't comfortable, but it was the only place I felt I could think clearly. The leaked documents gave me a starting point. One file referenced a defunct undersea monitoring project that had operated out of a decommissioned Cold War station. In Alaska, the coordinates were blurred, but part of a handwritten note in the corner caught my attention. Serov, Survey 9, Site B. I tracked down a retired geophysicist who had worked on submersible operations in that region during the early 2000s. He was reluctant to speak at first, but when I showed him a still from the sonar image we'd captured during our dive, something changed. He went quiet, then finally said, "We saw something like that in '03. We weren't supposed to log it." He gave me a drive with archived footage and told me not to contact him again. Back in the storage unit, I loaded the files. They were low resolution, but clear enough to be useful. One video showed a remote-operated vehicle drifting across the ocean floor before halting in front of a strange formation. It was a structure, partially buried, shaped like a dome with angled struts radiating outward. Faint lights blinked along, its edge pulsing in what looked like a pattern. The feed cut off abruptly. There were no notes in the metadata, no official logs. It had been intentionally buried in a mislabeled folder. I started cross-referencing other records. Several research vessels had been funded in the early 2000s by shell companies linked to energy exploration. But the routes and dive targets didn't match typical geological interests. Their focus wasn't fossil fuels. They were mapping known deep-sea anomalies. These companies had ties to defense contractors, many of whom had quietly secured patents for energy systems, involving magnetic field manipulation and fluid resonance control technologies not yet understood by mainstream science. Among the files, I found another set of documents detailing the retrieval of artifacts from seafloor excavation sites. These included fragments of a composite alloy with molecular structures unknown to metallurgy databases. A single memo referenced contact points between these materials and bioelectric fields, implying interaction with living tissue. This wasn't just exploration, it was experimentation. One document stood out, a survey detailing a massive underwater complex approximately 400 miles east of Guam. It was marked Redacted Zone, Active Monitoring. Satellite overlays had been scrubbed, but an older set of bathymetric scans still existed in a university archive. I compared them to recent maps and noticed something subtle. The seafloor elevation had changed. A rise of nearly 7 meters across a square mile grid. That kind of shift doesn't happen naturally, not at that depth, and not in a perfect rectangle. Around this time, I began receiving anonymous tips. Someone using the alias Siren sent encrypted messages through a secure channel I didn't advertise. The first message simply read, "The trench isn't the only gate. Site D6 is active again." I had no idea who they were or how they found me, but the details in their notes matched classified terminology I'd seen only in the directorate. Files. Siren's intel led me to a hidden research initiative buried inside a now-defunct Joint Military Oceanographic Grant Program. The project had been dissolved on paper over a decade ago, but the funding continued under unrelated budget lines. Equipment purchases, deep-sea drone maintenance, satellite bandwidth allocations, everything pointed to ongoing activity. These weren't passive observations, they were guarding something. The further I went, the clearer the shape of it all became. Somewhere beneath the ocean, there were structures, not natural, not ours, connected across locations and eras. The Abyssal Directorate wasn't just covering them up. They were trying to control them, or contain them. And if the evidence was right, there was more than one of these sites, and they weren't dormant. I didn't know what I'd uncover next, but I knew the next step. If I wanted the truth, I had to get closer, not to the known maps or approved dive zones, but the blank spots. The places where the seafloor records stop without reason. The parts they don't want us to see. Siren's messages stopped for 3 days. During that silence, I made preparations. I knew I couldn't return to any government-linked dive zones without triggering alerts. So I turned to a group of independent researchers I'd met years ago at a marine tech conference. They worked on experimental ROVs and long-range autonomous drones, most of it off the books. They were cautious at first, but I had something they couldn't ignore: data pointing to an unmarked underwater structure emitting energy signatures well outside natural ranges. We agreed on a plan. I funded the expedition anonymously and gave them the coordinates. 9N 142 Ian, isolated trench off the continental shelf, rarely visited and poorly mapped. It took 10 days to outfit the drone with proper shielding and redundant communication lines. On the morning of the launch, I stayed behind at the control trailer while they operated offshore. The descent began smoothly. Currents were mild, visibility fair at 3,200 meters. The drone passed through a cloud of particulate matter that temporarily scrambled the onboard sonar. We waited. The feed returned 3 minutes later. The camera stabilized on something we hadn't expected. A smooth, metallic surface extended across the ocean floor, partially buried by sediment. Unlike a wreck, there was no fragmentation, no decay. The structure was seamless, an arc-shaped segment embedded into the slope of the trench wall. As the drone circled, we picked up electromagnetic pulses radiating at regular intervals. The waveform was stable, patterned. I recognized it. It matched fragments of the signal from the Dorian wave's final transmission. We moved the drone closer. A faint glow pulsed from a recessed groove along the object's edge. Then something shifted. A section of the arc retracted mechanically, deliberately revealing a chamber beneath. The interior reflected almost no light. Our infrared scan failed to register temperature variance. It was as if the space consumed energy rather than emitting it. Inside, at the chamber's center, was a single object resting on a raised pedestal. The drone's manipulator arm extended slowly. We retrieved it. It took hours to bring the device to the surface. Back at the lab, under controlled isolation protocols, we began analysis. The object was cylindrical, about the size of a shoebox, with no visible seams or markings. Its surface felt metallic, but showed no reaction to temperature change or magnetic fields. When we ran a high-frequency scan, the machine reacted, producing a brief but measurable distortion in the surrounding electromagnetic field. Then it activated. A soft vibration ran through the containment platform. Lights flickered, instruments spiked. The device remained cold to the touch, but its energy field expanded outward. It was like standing near a static charge that had awareness subtle, but undeniable. Over the next 12 minutes, patterns formed along its surface. Symbols, not random shapes, but mathematical glyph spline numbers, binary sets, harmonic ratios, the same structures from the sonar cave, the same code embedded in the Dorians. Final message: this wasn't a remnant of a lost civilization. It was something else entirely, and it wasn't dead. We isolated the device, disconnected all network access, and shut down power to the surrounding equipment. The interference stopped immediately, but the internal core of the object revealed only under extreme magnification continued to vibrate, its pattern shifting every few seconds as if responding to observation. One of the technicians whispered, "It's thinking." No one corrected him. The news reached the wrong ears faster than I expected. Within 24 hours, the lab was hit with a coordinated cyberattack. Power was cut. Backup drives were wiped. Our lead technician's apartment was broken into. He was unharmed, but shaken. No valuables stolen. Only his research notebooks were taken. The message was clear. We relocated the device to an undisclosed location. I kept no digital records, no cloud backups. Everything now existed only in print, on film, or in memory. But the truth had changed. No longer a theory, no longer suspicion. This was proof. The ocean had hidden something for a long time. Now it was waking up. After securing the artifact, I knew it wouldn't be safe to stay in one place for long. The signals we intercepted, the cyber attacks, and the increasing surveillance made that clear. So I moved everything, notes, samples, recordings, to a mobile lab housed in a modified shipping container. It allowed me to travel without leaving a trail. I didn't rely on commercial satellites or public mapping anymore. Instead, I used historical naval charts and pre-2000 bathymetric data, the kind that hadn't yet been filtered or cleaned by military contracts. I focused on a stretch of the Pacific between the Solomon Islands and Micronesia. It's a vast region, rarely traveled, poorly charted, and ignored by most oceanographic research. Sonar mapping in these areas had been considered too inconsistent. For reliable surveys, that wasn't an accident. I suspected interference, not error. I launched a new scan using an independent drone equipped with analog sensors, no wireless components, no chance for remote tampering. It took 42 hours. To complete a pass, what came back confirmed my suspicion. The seafloor wasn't empty. In multiple regions, especially along the lower slopes of the Antong Java Plateau, there were vast rectangular formations buried just beneath the silt. Perfectly parallel ridges, grid-like depressions. Some were as large as city blocks. No tectonic event or natural erosion could have created such uniformity. At one location, the drone recorded a sharp spike in electromagnetic activity. Not random, rhythmic. The pattern echoed the earlier artifact's activation sequence, short pulses in harmonic intervals. The signal was strongest at 11s, 160 EA, location officially classified as unremarkable. I sent a second drone, this one configured to run silent. It transmitted only once, at a preset depth, then shut down until retrieval. It entered a trench pocket and immediately recorded temperature fluctuations that made no geological sense, sharp drops followed by localized surges. This wasn't caused by venting. It was coming from below the rock bed. Whatever lay beneath wasn't following Earth's thermal laws. The drone's camera caught something else, a shimmer, almost like a heat wave, distorting the water around. A narrow crevice. When I enhanced the footage, I could see faint geometric lines embedded in the rock itself. Not surface markings, internal structure, something artificial buried beneath layers of volcanic stone. I reviewed decades-old seismic charts. The crevice hadn't always been there. It had opened recently, less than 2 years ago, based on regional quake data. Whatever had been sealed was now exposed, even if just partially. Around this time, reports surfaced in obscure maritime incident logs unusual compass behavior, instrument malfunctions, and brief blackouts on passing cargo ships. Most were dismissed as equipment failure, but I saw the pattern. The disruptions all occurred near the same uncharted zones where the drone had recorded its anomalies. I ran a new set of comparisons between these energy spikes and archived satellite readings. Several overlapping events showed magnetic disturbances, but only in high-resolution infrared scans taken during military mapping exercises. Civilian satellites never showed them. Someone had filtered the public data. The more I studied it, the more obvious it became. These weren't isolated locations. They were nodes interconnected, forming a rough perimeter around what I now believe is a concealed structure, possibly a transit system or containment field, hidden in the abyssal plain. And they were active. That night, while reviewing signal data, I picked up something new. A low-frequency hum, buried under the noise, slowly rising and falling in consistent intervals. I filtered it through the same algorithm we'd used on the artifact, a single sequence repeated every 61 seconds. It wasn't language, it wasn't random, it was a pattern. I triangulated the signal's origin using 3 separate listening stations and confirmed it was coming from the same region as the buried grid. This signal wasn't broadcasting out, it was scanning, searching. Something under the ocean wasn't just waiting anymore. It was aware, and it was reaching. I began cataloging incidents. Any unexplained oceanic event recorded over the past 15 years. Most had been dismissed by scientists as statistical outliers or sensor malfunctions. But side by side, the patterns were hard to ignore. Sudden drops in sea temperature, localized current reversals, and rogue waves that rose without warning in calm seas. Each one occurred within a few hundred kilometers of the zones I'd already mapped. One case in particular stood out. In 2014, a deep-sea research platform stationed north of Papua New Guinea experienced a 30-second acoustic blackout. All sonar, radio, and seismic readings went silent. The platform's internal logs showed no damage. The surrounding ocean registered a temperature drop of 5 degrees Celsius in less than a minute, impossible under natural conditions. The report was archived, marked equipment anomaly, and buried under non-critical status. The lead technician on that mission disappeared 2 weeks later during a solo dive. The footage from his last descent had never been released. I traced the blackout to a larger pattern of low-frequency sound bursts reported by civilian vessels and oil rigs. These bursts often came with secondary effects: pressure shifts, compass interference, or sudden behavioral changes in marine life. I analyzed hydrophone data from 3 separate locations and overlaid them on a 12-month timeline. The bursts always followed the same pattern: 2 short pulses, a pause, then a longer, sustained tone. It was a signal, not random and not geological. I contacted a former colleague at an acoustic research institute. I fed him a sample without telling him the source. He ran it through his lab's marine pattern database. His results were unsettling. The tonal structure resembled echolocation, but was far too slow for whales or dolphins. The interval between pulses was unnatural, too regular, too deliberate. He asked where I'd gotten the data. I told him it was an academic exercise. I never heard from him again. By now, I had compiled enough data to fill 100 pages. Each anomaly told a story, shifting tides with no gravitational explanation, waves forming in symmetrical patterns, cloud cover aligning perfectly with oceanic ridges for days at a time. One cluster of data near the Java Trench showed an eerie acoustic signature embedded in the ambient noise, barely detectable but persistent. I filtered it again and again until a waveform emerged. It mirrored the electromagnetic pulse from the device we had recovered. The connections were no longer theoretical, they were measurable. Something beneath the ocean wasn't just altering localized environments. It was influencing the entire marine system, subtly, gradually, and with precision. When I cross-referenced the anomalies with major coastal disruptions, flooding, unexplained surges, and weather shifts most matched within a 72-hour window, traditional climate models didn't account for this, but the data was consistent. I began to suspect the anomalies weren't accidental. They were test signals, pulses sent out to measure global impact. Controlled environmental manipulation. One night, while reviewing deep-sea spectrograms, I detected a cluster of tones that seemed to repeat irregularly. The pattern didn't fit any known natural phenomenon, but when I applied a modulation filter, a simple binary structure appeared. I converted it. The output wasn't a message in language, but in mathematics a repeating loop of prime numbers nested within geometric ratios, a signature, or maybe a key. I marked the coordinates, 7.4s, 156.8e. That location had no active research stations, no cables, and no scheduled maritime traffic. Yet 5 separate anomalies had occurred there in the last 6 months each, involving unexplained sound, bursts and rapid shifts in local pressure. The ocean, in that region, was misbehaving. I sent a drone to survey the site. As it approached depth, instruments began to fail. The pressure sensors returned impossible readings, oscillating values, as if reality itself was fluctuating. The drone lost contact for 6 minutes. When the signal resumed, it transmitted a single still image, a swirl of light bending around, a central void. Water shouldn't behave like that. The image defied physics, but it wasn't corrupted. It was real. That void, whatever it was radiating energy. Not heat, not light, something else. Something measurable only in its disruption of the environment around it. I didn't sleep that night. For the first time, I felt something closer to fear than curiosity. The ocean wasn't just reacting, it was responding. After the image of the light-warping void came through, I began reviewing older footage from deep-sea ecosystems, particularly those shot near trench walls, hydrothermal vents, and abyssal plains. I wasn't looking for structures or energy, anomalies this time. I was watching the fauna, specifically bioluminescent organisms. In previous years, their light pulses had been considered defensive or reproductive behavior, randomized displays with no discernible pattern. But with everything I now knew, I looked again. I isolated hours of footage showing deep-sea jellyfish, siphonophores, and comb jellies. Their bioluminescence flickered in precise intervals. Initially, I dismissed it as coincidence. Then footage from different years and different locations. The patterns matched, not in frequency or brightness, but in rhythm. The same sequences of flashes repeated across species and regions. Some were separated by thousands of miles, yet the sequence was identical. That's when I brought in a cryptography tool I'd previously used to analyze signal pulses. I treated the light bursts as a coded message binary, representations of long and short pulses. When the sequences were translated, the data didn't form language. It formed coordinates, time-stamped oceanic coordinates, locations of the anomalies I had already identified. I didn't know whether these organisms were being used or were acting on their own, but the precision of the signals was undeniable. The ocean wasn't just responding to buried structures or environmental manipulation. It was transmitting, and it was using its own biology to do it. I conducted a controlled experiment using live footage from a remote submersible station near a known signal site. The drone observed a cluster of bioluminescent creatures circling a rock formation. Their pulses began slowly, then accelerated. Each flash mirrored the hum I had logged weeks earlier, 61-second cycles. As the drone moved closer, the pattern changed. The pulses doubled, then reversed. I shifted the drone away, and the organisms returned to the original rhythm. It was a form of proximity-based response. They weren't just pulsing light, they were communicating based on external presence. I needed to test this further. I replayed the low-frequency pulse I'd captured from the void site. I filtered it through underwater speakers near a remote cove off the Philippine Trench and waited. Nothing happened for over an hour. Then, at a depth of nearly 5,000 meters, the hydrophone picked up faint clicking sounds, followed by a rise. In ambient bioluminescence, the creatures had responded, not randomly, not aggressively, but in synchrony. I recorded the sequence. This time, it wasn't just coordinates. It was a message, lubricating values, structured like a handshake protocol, a kind of initialization sequence. Something was trying to connect. The implications were staggering. These deep-sea organisms, previously thought to operate in isolation, were acting as a distributed communication system. Their bioluminescence wasn't instinct, it was language, and they were relaying signals across the ocean floor. The theory seemed impossible until I found a declassified study buried in a digital archive. The report, marked with the same abyssal directorate insignia as the other leaked files, referenced biointegrated relay systems and adaptive photonic structures. It outlined preliminary work on leveraging deep-sea lifeforms as low bandwidth communication nodes for covert oceanic surveillance. The study was dated 12 years ago. Whatever they had started then, nature had already perfected. The more I examined these patterns, the more it became clear. The creatures were acting as messengers. Whether they were naturally adapted or artificially guided, they were transmitting data between buried structures across vast distances. The pulse signals I'd intercepted weren't isolated. They were synchronized, routed through a living network. This wasn't a system built by humans. It predated us or had evolved without us. And somehow, through some mechanism we didn't understand, it knew how to hide in plain sight. The ocean wasn't just a hiding place for ancient machines or lost civilizations. It was part of the system itself, a living carrier of signals, memories, and intent. For the first time in this investigation, I wasn't sure what I was dealing with, but it was intelligent, and it was aware of us. The discovery of bioluminescent communication forced me to reconsider what I believed about deep-sea life. I had always viewed these species as isolated survivors of evolutionary extremes, creatures adapted to pressure, darkness, and scarcity. But now I saw something else. Structure, behavior, response, not instinctual, but deliberate. I turned to incident. Logs collected by commercial shipping vessels and remote research teams. Over the past 5 years, there had been a steady increase in unverified sightings of enormous sea creatures' descriptions that didn't match known species. Some reports spoke of eyes that glowed with faint amber light. Others described serpentine, forms moving with mechanical precision. Most were dismissed, filed under hallucinations or misidentified whales. But the details were too consistent, too exact. One report, filed by a Norwegian trawler off the South Pacific, described a creature nearly 60 meters long, moving silently beside the ship for over a minute before vanishing into the dark. Sonar registered nothing. The crew's video footage was confiscated during a routine inspection at port. Officially, the ship's logs made no mention of the event. I tracked several similar encounters. In each case, the ships had passed within proximity of one of the anomaly zones I had mapped. Earlier, some of these vessels later reported unexpected hull corrosion, unexplained power fluctuations, or malfunctioning navigation systems. The pattern was unmistakable. Something was down there, something large, and it was not indifferent to human presence. Through an independent contact, I obtained a set of internal military documents. The most revealing included an outline of a classified program known only by its codename, Project Sentinel. It detailed attempts to bioengineer aquatic surveillance organisms, hybrids designed to mimic marine life, but equipped with sensory implants and behavioral overrides. The technology described was decades ahead of anything in the public domain. Nanofibrous muscle weaves, subdermal antennae, artificial brainstem loops responsive to acoustic commands. The final pages listed early test results and failures. But one line stopped me cold. Field-ready variants, deployed in trench zones for environmental integration assessments. Status: active. It was dated 4 years ago. If these creatures existed, and the evidence suggested they did, they weren't entirely organic. They were tools, living machines designed to guard or observe the ocean's secrets. Whether they still followed their original programming was unclear, but they were there, watching, responding. Then came the footage. It arrived anonymously, delivered by a courier who left no name. The flash drive contained a single video, file grainy, night vision footage from what looked like a submersible cockpit. The camera faced forward as the vehicle approached a deep-sea ridge. Out of the darkness, something moved. It didn't swim so much as glide, its motion impossibly smooth. Pale, segmented plating covered its body. Along its sides, bands of glowing blue light pulsed in perfect synchronization. As it passed, the submersible's sensors spiked electromagnetic interference, temperature drop, and acoustic dampening. Then the screen went black. The file ended abruptly. I cross-checked the timestamp. It matched a dive window from a foreign naval operation that had been aborted without explanation. Official records claimed mechanical failure, but the footage told another story. I wasn't alone in my search anymore. Others had found pieces of the truth. Some were working from the inside. Others had disappeared trying. I began to wonder whether the creatures I'd been tracking were acting on their own. Maybe the experiment had gone too far. Or maybe it hadn't been our experiment to begin with. The deeper I went, the clearer the conflict became. These beings weren't simply anomalies. They were participants, guardians, sentinels, or remnants of something older. And they were tied directly to the oceanic signals, the buried structures, and the bioluminescent codes. It wasn't about life beneath the surface anymore. It was about control. And the question wasn't whether we could understand what lived in the deep. It was whether we had already altered it and what it was becoming because of us. The next breakthrough came through satellites. Data imagery captured during a thermal scan of the South Pacific Basin by a European oceanographic satellite. A researcher I trusted sent it to me, encrypted, knowing what I was looking for. The scan had been flagged for inconsistencies, sections of the ocean floor that registered colder than the surrounding terrain in geometric patterns. When I isolated the frames and enhanced the image layers, the shapes became clearer. They weren't random. One formation stretched nearly a kilometer and had perfect 90-degree angles. Another resembled a five-pointed star embedded in a shallow depression. But the most striking was a pyramid, 3 visible sides, uniform slope, and a flat peak. It wasn't just large, it was proportionally flawless. I needed confirmation. I used archived sonar sweeps taken by commercial vessels during routine mapping. Most had been dismissed for signal noise or classified as geological irregularities, but when overlaid with the satellite data, they matched. Identical contours, depth levels, and thermal shadows. These structures weren't new. They had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, their data corrupted or mislabeled before anyone could take notice. The pyramid was located just northeast of the Kermadec Trench, deep enough to avoid submersible exploration, and just outside the borders of major research zones. I traced every dive mission near that region over the past decade. 2 had ended early due to instrument failure. 1 expedition vessel, flagged under an educational grant, had gone missing. Its last transmission mentioned unexpected seismic activity, but no quake was recorded. I began to suspect sabotage. These discoveries were being erased in real time, not destroyed, managed. Someone had built a mechanism of disinformation strong enough to suppress satellite data, field reports, and scientific analysis. It was clear now, the Abyssal Directorate's reach extended far beyond passive observation. They weren't just guarding secrets, they were actively removing them. I reviewed my own findings against ancient geological records and submerged landmass hypotheses. One artifact I had retrieved weeks earlier, the small metallic prism with impossible internal temperature stability, responded to proximity with one structure in particular, the pyramid. When I overlaid the coordinates onto a magnetic field map, there was a correlation. The site emitted a consistent, low-frequency pulse that disrupted local readings, enough to prevent accurate mapping. I realized the structures themselves might not just be ruins, they were still active. I sent a deep scan drone to survey the perimeter of the pyramid site. As it descended, static corrupted the live feed. The audio returned first, a strange harmonic resonance, slow, smooth, and rhythmic. Then the visual came through. The pyramid's surface wasn't stone. It was covered in an alloy similar to the material we'd sampled from the trench cave. The surface reflected no light and seemed to absorb sonar. Around its base were openings, arched corridors, partially collapsed but visibly symmetrical. Some were lined with what looked like ribbed supports, not unlike modern construction. One of the drone's instruments picked up short-range electromagnetic pulses, rapid and encoded. The pattern didn't match any known human device. I compared it to the bioluminescent sequences recorded from the deep-sea organisms. There was a structural match, the same rhythm, the same spacing. I concluded the structures were not only communicating with each other, but also interacting with the surrounding ecosystem, perhaps even controlling it. This wasn't architecture in the traditional sense. It was part of a systema, distributed, network operating beneath the ocean's surface, hiding in depths no modern infrastructure could reach. I attempted to transmit a data burst using the same pattern we had extracted from the bioluminescent relay system. The signal was weak, degraded by interference, but it returned something. A feedback pulse, measurable, precise, and intelligent. Then the drone shut down. There was no explosion, no mechanical failure. It simply stopped. Power gone. Controls unresponsive. We retrieved only partial logs, but enough to confirm the event. Something within the pyramid had responded briefly, then decisively. I backed up all data, stored it offline, and physically secured the samples. I no longer assumed I had time. Whatever was beneath the surface wasn't waiting anymore. It was listening. It was choosing when to respond and when to erase the evidence. The pyramid wasn't just a remnant. It was a doorway, and we had just knocked, following the drone's sudden failure near the pyramid. I focused on physical evidence items that couldn't be erased or remotely shut down. In the weeks prior, I had archived several small objects recovered during dives near the anomalous zones. Most were dismissed by field researchers as metallic debris weathered beyond recognition. But under magnification and non-destructive testing, their story changed. The first artifact was a thin, disc-shaped object no larger than a human palm. It was made of an alloy I couldn't identify, with properties similar to the trench artifact. From Chapter 5, non-reflective and impervious to heat or pressure. Its surface bore a set of etched grooves, each arranged in concentric rings. When scanned with high-frequency lasers, the grooves reflected patterns of resonance that produced harmonic tones, precise repeating sequences. Not natural wear, not random design. This was information encoded in vibration. Another artifact was a shard of metal embedded in a piece of hardened sediment. It had a crystalline structure fused along one edge, resembling early attempts at fiber optics, except the material was not glass. When exposed to ambient light, it projected faint geometric shapes across its surface, triangles, arcs, and interlocking loops. The patterns matched those recorded in the glyphs on the underwater cave wall. One object in particular defied classification entirely. A rod of dark metal, approximately 20 centimeters long, with a seam down its center. I assumed it was solid until a subtle tap near the seam caused it to split open, revealing a hollow core lined with microscopic filaments. Each strand emitted a faint electric charge when handled. The entire object behaved like a capacitor, storing and discharging energy at a scale impossible with current technology. There were no markings, no corrosion, no signs of aging. I tested samples using a particle spectrometer borrowed from a trusted lab in Jakarta. The results were consistent. Isotopic ratios not found in any known terrestrial alloys. The metal had been formed using processes that didn't exist on Earth, or at least not anymore. This wasn't ancient human engineering. It was older, and it was precise. The artifacts also carried mythological resonance. Several of the symbols carved into their surfaces resembled motifs from pre-classical civilizations, Atlantean myths, Mesopotamian relics, and Polynesian oral traditions. Not direct copies, but echoes, as if our ancient stories had been inspired by fragments of these objects long before we knew what they were. I reached out to a linguistic anthropologist who had worked with me during an earlier marine archaeology project. I gave her the glyphs without context. Within days, she contacted me. Her translation was limited, but she had managed to identify recurring motifs, concepts of transition, binding, and return. One sequence, she believed, referred to cycles of containment, as if something had been locked away repeatedly throughout time. That theory aligned with a passage I found in a restricted document labeled Abyssal Folklore Integration. It described similarities between symbols found in submerged artifacts and indigenous Cave drawings across Pacific Islands drawings, often dismissed as early tribal iconography. The document hypothesized that knowledge of these structures had been passed down through generations, not scientifically, but culturally, embedded in myths. If that was true, then the idea of lost civilizations wasn't just romantic speculation. Something had existed before our records began, something capable of creating durable, intelligent technology and hiding it beneath the ocean for thousands of years. And someone, at some point, had tried to erase them. Not just physically, but from memory. But the ocean doesn't forget. It preserves. As I pieced together more connections, I began to notice increased surveillance. Drones flew near my last base of operation, often lingering overhead without identification. An attempted break-in at my secure lab occurred 2 nights after I published an encrypted article summarizing my findings to a closed group of independent researchers. Nothing was taken, but the message was clear. The evidence was dangerous. Not because it threatened safety, but because it threatened control. Whoever the directorate worked for, their goal wasn't to understand the truth. It was to manage it, to limit its exposure, to filter discovery through a system of denial. But they couldn't deny this. Not forever. The artifacts were real, and they were speaking, if not in language, then in pattern and presence. They didn't belong to the past. They were preparing for something that hadn't yet arrived. The artifacts pointed to more than scattered technology. They hinted at entire infrastructures, built environments, submerged and long forgotten. If those existed, there had to be ruins, city-like formations, not just isolated structures. I reviewed every sonar anomaly, every dismissed seismic scan, every lost expedition report. Patterns emerge, clusters of geometric formations buried under silt or volcanic residue. These weren't random, they were too consistent. I focused on a region west of the Mariana Trench, where continental shelves once existed before tectonic shifts submerged them. Historical data showed unusual terrain, their flat plains bordered by steep drops, rectangular depressions, and high ridges forming unnatural angles. These areas were dismissed in most geological surveys due to low strategic interest and unverified readings. That language now read like a warning. With the help of a private oceanic research group operating out of Okinawa, I arranged a deep tow scan using low-frequency sonar capable of penetrating sediment layers. The scan revealed what satellite imaging could not. Beneath 20 meters of compacted seabed lay structured layouts, parallel lines stretching for hundreds of meters, perpendicular intersections, and what appeared to be domed enclosures. Some formed hexagonal clusters, others extended in long corridors. One formation stood out. It resembled a circular plaza with concentric rings, partially collapsed, but intact enough to suggest deliberate design. In the center was a spire-shaped elevation surrounded by low structures. It looked like a hub, a center of something once populated, now buried by pressure and time. I deployed a small rove outfitted with my... As it descended into the region, the imaging came through grainy but clear. Stone walls lined with metallic plating, doorways sealed by sediment, relief carvings partially visible along the remaining surfaces. One showed what looked like a stylized map, lines radiating from a central point to others in a wide arc, a network, possibly a transportation grid. Then came the symbols, the same language found on the artifacts, repeated in rows along the interior of a collapsed structure. I captured every frame. The architecture suggested function residential, administrative, maybe even ritualistic, and the materials were unnatural in their preservation. They showed no decay, only concealment. At one point, the ROV recorded a burst of static and a faint hum, similar to the pulse captured near the pyramid. The ground shook, a minor tremor, but strong enough to disturb the silt. As visibility cleared, the drone revealed a buried statue, humanoid in shape, but with elongated limbs and recessed facial features. Not alien in appearance, but distinctly unhuman. I checked the facial geometry. It matched drawings from an indigenous oral tradition. I'd reviewed months earlier stories of those who walked beneath the water. I immediately backed up the footage and recalled the drone. Before it reached the surface, its cameras failed. Its movement slowed. I initiated emergency ascent. The ROV made it back, but its core memory was wiped. Only the live relay footage survived, saved by my off-grid recording setup. I presented the findings to a trusted network of international researchers. Most were stunned. A few offered quiet support. None were willing to speak publicly. They knew the risk. Just days after the transmission, 2 of the researchers involved were detained during routine port inspections. One had his equipment seized. The other disappeared en route to a symposium in Singapore. His hotel room was left untouched. His passport never used again. Meanwhile, the site showed signs of renewed activity. Satellite flyovers revealed faint disturbances, sediment displacement, and sonar jamming fields. Someone had detected our scans and moved in fast. By the time I returned, the region was under restricted access, with surface patrols running non-stop. The Abyssal Directorate had taken control, but the truth was already out. The scans were archived. The images were dispersed. What we'd uncovered was undeniable. A buried city, not a myth. Not a guess, but a physical place. Designed, constructed, and concealed. I had once thought I was chasing lost technology. I now understood I was walking through the remnants of a forgotten civilization. One advanced, intentional, and far older than any known record. And someone still wanted it hidden. I had seen the evidence, ruins too precise to be natural, symbols too consistent to be coincidence, and technology too advanced to belong to any known era. But something deeper was beginning to form, a pattern. The ruins weren't just remnants of a lost culture. They hinted at something far more complex, civilizations that had not only existed before us, but may have never left. I returned to accounts from coastal indigenous communities, oral traditions passed down for centuries, stories of beings who lived beneath the sea, not gods, but travelers. They were described as tall, silent, luminous, not creatures of myth, but watchers, sometimes protectors, sometimes threats. Most dismissed these stories as metaphor. I no longer could. One account from a Micronesian elder described keepers of the trench, who walked through lightless waters and spoke in patterns of glow and hum. Another from a South American coastal tribe referred to those who went below during the sky's collapse. The stories weren't identical, but their core details aligned. Underwater dwellers, ancient knowledge, hidden passageways, and always a warning: do not follow the lights. That warning now made sense. I followed a lead from one of the last researchers I trusted. He directed me to a classified excavation site in the southern Indian Ocean, shut down a decade ago after an unexplained collapse. He had obtained raw sonar data before the shutdown. It showed what appeared to be a network of corridors beneath the ocean floor, tunnels branching from a central hub. Some extended 4 kilometers. The Alignment matched ancient celestial patterns, including the Orion Belt and Pleiades cluster. I tracked the excavation coordinates and sent a drone to survey the outer edge. It didn't reach the hub. Instead, it captured a glimpse of something that didn't belong movement. Slow, methodical, not fish, not mechanical. A figure, upright, drifting just above the seabed. It turned briefly toward the camera before vanishing into the shadows. The footage was shaky, but the outline was clear, bipedal, humanoid, but elongated. Not wearing a suit, its body emitted a faint glow along its spine and shoulders. No propulsion system, no equipment, just presence. I played the footage for a linguist who specialized in ancient root languages. She noticed something odd. When we filtered the ambient audio, we uncovered a repeated clicking pattern. She slowed it down, reversed it, and then layered it over one of the bioluminescent pulse sequences. The two matched. A translation was impossible, but the message was obvious. These beings weren't just surviving, they were communicating. At this point, I was contacted again, not by siren. This time, it was a direct, face-to-face meeting arranged through an anonymous drop message and coordinates sent via shortwave radio. The man who arrived gave no name. He looked ordinary. That made him more unsettling. He told me he was part of a private network that had operated outside government oversight for decades. Their mission, as he explained it, was preservation not of ecosystems, but of ancient knowledge. Knowledge, he claimed, originated from a civilization that had retreated beneath the sea long before ours began. He didn't confirm their human or hybrid, but he made one point clear. They were still here, hidden, watching. Some among them had interacted with surface dwellers over the centuries, shaping belief systems, planting warnings in culture. Others, he said, believed in complete separation. He claimed that the Abyssal Directorate's efforts weren't just about concealment, they were a response, a countermeasure. Something had disturbed the balance our mining, drilling, and militarized ocean mapping. We had crossed a boundary we didn't know existed, and now the Watchers were reacting. Before he left, he handed me a laminated card. It held a single phrase in a language I didn't recognize, with a set of coordinates below it. The location pointed to a stretch of seabed near the edge of the Philippine Sea. When I overlaid it on my existing map of anomalous zones, it matched a location previously dismissed due to magnetic interference. Another blind spot. I asked what I would find there. He paused, then said, "The ones who never surfaced." The coordinates the man gave me led to an isolated stretch of seabed in the western Philippine Sea. I arranged a private launch using a retrofitted submersible capable of withstanding extreme depths. No corporate sponsors, no institutional oversight. Just me and one trusted technician operating under strict radio silence. The route took us through unregulated waters, charted and left off most public maritime maps. That alone told me we were getting close. As we approached the target site, the water pressure began fluctuating in short intervals. Our sensors, calibrated for deep stability, struggled to keep up. The depth gauge flickered, readings shifted. Then we crossed what I can only describe as a boundary. The turbulence vanished. The instruments leveled. The surrounding water grew oddly still, as if we had entered a sealed pocket in the ocean itself. We descended through a haze of particulate matter. Visibility was low. Then, out of the shapes began to appear angular, mechanical, and far too symmetrical to be natural. At first, I thought we were looking at debris from an old wreck, but the geometry was too precise. Towers rose from the seabed in clean lines. Beams connected them at perfect angles. The material shimmered faintly, resisting sonar mapping. This wasn't a ruin, it was operational. We maneuvered closer. A cluster of large structures came into view, hexagonal platforms, partially buried, connected by smooth conduits. One emitted a steady pulse of light from its core, soft and white. Not harsh like human-made lighting. The pulse aligned with our equipment's previous signal logs. I recorded everything. Then we saw it, what looked like a power node. A dome embedded in the ocean floor pulsed in concentric waves. The field around it disrupted our magnetic sensors. My technician warned against getting closer, but I pushed forward. I needed a closer look. The moment we passed its outer ring, our external cameras distorted. For 3 full seconds, the feed inverted, light bent, and water appeared still as glass. The dome's surface rippled as though breathing, and then something moved inside it. We couldn't make out details, only shadows. But whatever it was, it reacted to our presence. The dome pulsed harder, and a high-frequency vibration rattled through the sub. Our lights flickered. The technician initiated a slow retreat. As we backed away, the dome calmed, and the vibration ceased. Later, analysis showed we had triggered an energy response. The structure wasn't passive. It was designed to activate in proximity to specific signals, biometric or otherwise. The pulse we recorded matched the activation pattern of the device we'd recovered weeks earlier, down to the millisecond. I suspected the artifact wasn't standalone. It was a key, or a beacon. Back on the surface, I began tracing known reports of experimental energy systems developed in secret during the last 20 years. Most had no public results, quietly, dissolved or absorbed into classified budgets. But I found a few references buried in patent applications projects proposing cloaking systems based on liquid phase interference fields, propulsion mechanisms using quantum vibration to negate drag, and high-capacity storage devices that relied on harmonic resonance rather than chemical reactions. They weren't theoretical. The systems we had just witnessed functioned on those exact principles. Our science was catching up to something that had been buried long before we began to explore it. That dome wasn't built from human theory. It predated our understanding and had simply waited to be rediscovered. A final set of files, leaked from a closed defense review panel, referenced a proposed black site initiative, oceanic infrastructure recovery and assimilation. The file suggested certain factions within global defense circles weren't just studying the underwater technology, they were attempting to reverse engineer it for military dominance, propulsion, surveillance, energy, control, if successful. Whoever mastered it would leap decades ahead of current power structures. It wouldn't just shift geopolitical balance, it would destabilize it. That explained the secrecy, the silencing, the disappearances. I archived the footage. Multiple backups, distributed across several countries. The truth was growing too large for one person to hold. But I wasn't finished. The technology I'd seen was just one part of something larger, a system, a network, and I still hadn't found its source. Once I confirmed the deep-sea technology was operational, I knew I wasn't the only one who had seen it. There were too many coordinated cover-ups, too many lost missions, and too much silence around the same coordinates. I began looking into unlisted submersible activity dives that didn't appear in public maritime records. Through a mix of insider contacts and leaked naval data, I found what I was searching for. A sequence of covert expeditions by multiple countries, all aimed at the same trench systems I'd been exploring. These were not scientific missions. They were military, silent, fast, and precise, operated by custom-built submersibles designed to leave no sonar signature. I traced one of the earliest to 2009 joint operation between two governments known to collaborate on deep-sea weapons development. The objective was listed as reconnaissance of unverified geophysical anomalies. That was their term for the pyramid. The mission ended with an internal memo stating, "Target location compromised. Asset retrieval aborted. Subject unresponsive." That vague sentence said everything. In the years that followed, similar expeditions launched from private vessels disguised as commercial shipping operations. Some stayed in the trench for days at a time, running silent, reporting nothing. But the timing matched recorded anomalized energy pulses, electromagnetic disturbances, sudden shifts in marine traffic routing. These dives weren't observational, they were extraction missions. I obtained partial transcripts from one of these submersibles, codenamed Pelican Horizon. The team entered an unmapped chamber beneath the seabed using a forced access tunnel. The report mentions an internal structure filled with ambient light and zero resistance movement zones, an apparent gravity disruption field. Then the log ends abruptly. The next page is redacted. A second log begins a full day later with a different crew and no mention of the original team. Not missing, erased. The deeper I dug, the more aggressive the suppression became. Two of my sources stopped responding. One sent a final message. They found my backup drive. I didn't tell them about you, yet after that, silence. My communication logs were breached, and I was followed for 3 straight days in Manila. By a plain, unmarked vehicle. I changed locations twice. Then I stopped going above ground altogether, but the data kept coming. An anonymous source sent me sonar maps from an expedition 3 months earlier in the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench. They had discovered a sealed vault, 600 meters wide, embedded under the ocean floor. A mechanical iris massive and coldsat. Its center, surrounded by artificial basalt structures. The sonar signature matched the energy pattern recorded from the pyramid and the dome. Another node in the system. But this time, they weren't studying it. The maps showed drilling activity, controlled breaches, attempts to open it. That was the moment it clicked. The global race wasn't about understanding the structures. It was about controlling, access retrieving, whatever was inside before someone else did. Each nation had its own agenda, its own team, and its own silence. But they were all chasing the same thing, the source of the buried technology, the heart of the network. They called it the root vault. I compiled all the data coordinates, sonar logs, drone footage, intercepted transmissions, encrypted it across multiple storage devices. Each was placed in the hands of trusted allies, all sworn to release their contents publicly if I went silent for more than 72 hours. Then I did what I had avoided until now. I planned a dive of my own into the zone listed on the Pelican Horizon logs. It wasn't about proving the technology anymore. It was about reaching the system before it was weaponized or buried for good. The night before the launch, I received a message through a secure channel one I hadn't used in months. It was text only, unsigned. If you open it, you can't close it. They never could. I stared at the screen for a long time. I knew what the warning meant, but it was too late to turn back. The ocean was no longer a frontier. It was a mirror, showing Us, what we'd buried, and what was now rising to the surface. We launched just before dawn. The vessel was unmarked, the dive site remote, and the submersible outfitted with only analog controls. Nothing digital. Nothing that could be tracked or overridden remotely. My pilot was a former Navy technician who asked no questions, only verified coordinates and system integrity before sealing the hatch. We descended slowly, the trench falling away beneath us in layers of deepening blue, then black. At 9,000 meters, we passed through another anomaly field. The usual instrument drift gave way to silence. All acoustic sensors flattened, registering. A total absence of ambient noise. No current, no marine life. Just the hum of our own systems. Then, without warning, a signal broke through a rhythmic pulse, low and sharp, too uniform to be geological. I recognized the pattern instantly. It matched the broadcast I had intercepted months earlier from the energy dome. This time, though it was clearer, stronger, directed, we followed it. The ocean floor appeared, not as a slope or jagged bed, but as a smooth surface, metallic and matte, stretching for kilometers. It wasn't natural. This was a platform, engineered and installed. Our floodlights revealed towers spaced at even intervals, each topped with cylindrical antennas that rotated slowly without visible propulsion. They weren't gathering information, they were transmitting. The ocean floor was wired. We had entered. The heart of the surveillance network, a massive structure rose ahead. It resembled a satellite array turned inward, multiple spires, angled toward a central dome buried beneath translucent plating. The plating shimmered with soft blue light, pulsing with the same rhythm we had followed to this location. It wasn't just a hub. It was a receiver and broadcaster, capable of monitoring all signals within the trench and beyond. My technician activated the onboard recorder and began logging the frequencies emitted by the tower. Within minutes, the recorder overloaded. A spike in electromagnetic interference surged through the sub, shorting auxiliary systems. We lost external comms. We stayed still, waiting to see if the surge had triggered a response. It had. Lights appeared in the distance, rows of bioluminescent organisms rising from the seabed, moving in perfect formation. Not random, not drifting, aligned. As they approached, the signal pulse shifted. It now cycled in sequences of 4, spaced by a short harmonic tone. It wasn't just surveillance, it was communication. A language broadcast through both signal and life. Then, from the center of the dome, another structure emerged, the vertical column slowly rising, revealing embedded panels etched with glyphs identical to those we'd seen in the buried city. One panel split open. Inside, encased in a transparent sheath, was what appeared to be a human artifact, tablet, possibly thousands of years old, preserved perfectly. My technician froze. He recognized the design. The object had been referenced in a redacted file from a previous classified, devlost, presumed destroyed. It wasn't destroyed. It had been returned. The implications were staggering. The surveillance system wasn't just observing us. It was cataloging what we'd lost, protecting it. For whom or what I couldn't say. But this wasn't a war zone, it was a vault. As we ascended, I transmitted one final message through a low-frequency burst I had programmed weeks ago. It contained coordinates, signal logs, and imagery sent in encrypted packets to contacts across 6 continents. If I didn't surface, they'd know where I went, and they'd know what I found. We broke the surface after 12 hours. The boat was gone. In its place hovered a black aircraft, silent, unmarked, hovering on repulsion systems I'd never seen used in the open. The pilot and I held still. A voice came over our internal speaker, calm, even. "Stand by for retrieval. You are not under arrest. They didn't detain us. They didn't threaten us. They asked for the data." I told them it had already been distributed. They nodded. The voice said, "Then you've done your part." 2 days later, the trench Regent was declared a marine preservation zone by an international coalition that had never agreed on anything before. No explanation, no access, all monitoring systems removed. My name wasn't mentioned. My research vanished from public databases. But the story leaked piece by piece, not to the headlines, but into the cracks where truth tends to grow. I walk freely now, under watch but untouched. I'm a warning more than a threat, a symbol of what happens when someone sees too much and shares just enough. The ocean remains silent, but the signals still pulse. Somewhere beneath the waves, the watchers continue their work unseen, untouched and uninvited, but no longer unknown. It started with a ping, a sharp, clipped echo bouncing off the floor of the Diamantina fracture zone, an area so remote it barely existed on most naval charts. I was working with a private research firm out of Perth, hired to assist in ocean current modeling for climate projections. That's what they told us, anyway. But the data stream I intercepted wasn't about current drift. It was a pulse, narrowband, repeating every 11.4 seconds, perfectly regular and artificially clean. I wasn't supposed to log it, not officially, but I had seen these signals once before, back in 2023, when a Norwegian deep-sea probe had gone dark after detecting similar patterns near the Jan Mayen Ridge. That mission never made it to the public, but the documents were clear. The signal was identical. I flagged it, encrypted it, and sent it to a contact in New Zealand. I didn't expect the reply to come in less than an hour. "Do not trace, do not record, meet me." We met just off the coast of Dunedin, on a rusted barge converted into a floating lab. My contact was a former naval engineer, grey beard, dark eyes, and a look that told me he hadn't slept right in years. He pulled out a case and dropped it on the table. Inside was a hard drive marked Project Echo Glass. He told me the Australian Navy had constructed a deep-sea listening post, one they publicly dismantled in 2019. Except it wasn't dismantled. It was upgraded, relocated, and renamed the Black Array. Its purpose: to listen, not for submarines, not even for seismic events, but for non-ambient geometric transmissions. In simple terms, something beneath the seabed was sending structured signals. Signals that increased in strength after deep ocean drilling operations in the region. He handed me a set of coordinates and said, "If you go there, go dark." The last team didn't make it back. 3 weeks later, I secured passage on a Chinese cargo ship under a false name. Once offshore, I launched my own custom ROV light, fast, with analog control systems and zero GPS beaconing. As I dropped into the fracture zone, the ocean darkened to ink. Around 7,400 meters, the terrain changed. Jagged rock formations gave way to smooth plains, flat, like construction platforms. The signal returned stronger, now pulsing every 9.8 seconds. And then I saw it. A structure unlike anything I'd ever encountered. Massive pillars, spaced, evenly stretching into the abyss. each bore markings etched grooves filled with bioluminescent organisms reacting to the pulses. The grooves formed a pattern like circuits or code. I approached the largest column and ran a resonance scan. The return showed hollow cavities, perfectly machined. I wasn't looking at ruins, I was looking at a vault, and something inside was active. The deeper I scanned, the more erratic my instruments became. Magnetic interference spiked. My ROV's video feed began stuttering, showing frame drops in consistent intervals. Then came the distortion of visual echo, like two realities overlapping. One frame showed the pillars as they were. The next showed them eroded, buried, almost fossilized. As I recalibrated, an audio signal bled through low clicks, slow at first, then rapid. The same signal reported by the US Navy's failed AUKUS 3 dive in 2024 near the Tonga Trench. The team had claimed to discover a resonant cavity with synthetic heat output. Hours later, they lost contact. The mission was scrubbed. I knew I had only minutes before detection. I reversed the ROV, reeling it up, but just before it cleared the structure, something moved. A shadow, not drifting, not swimming, standing. Watching back at the surface, I passed the data. Buried in the feed was a high-frequency spike, timed exactly to the moment the ROV passed the central pillar. The waveform wasn't natural, it resembled encryption, but layered beneath it, my software detected harmonic subsonic waves embedded within the frequency, and when slowed to 1/10 of speed, they matched patterns from ancient geomagnetic carvings found at submerged ruins near Yonaguni Island. The conclusion was impossible to ignore. The vault wasn't just a structure, it was a transmitter. A living data repository activated by proximity. The code it broadcast wasn't just random noise. It was designed to communicate, possibly even control. And then came the worst part. I wasn't the only one listening. 2 days after uploading a small portion of the waveform to an encrypted forum, I received an unmarked package. Inside was a paper sheet, printed in red ink. Echo Glass Protocol. Executive stop. Cease transmission. Stage 3. Recovery initiated. Signal containment is a priority. There was no sender, but a tracer embedded in the packaging confirmed the drop. Originated from Diego Garcia, heavily fortified US naval base in the Indian Ocean, long rumored to house classified oceanic tech programs. This confirmed what whistleblower forums had claimed since 2022, a coalition of military powers, using cover operations and climate funding, was actively hunting these deep-sea systems. But why? Using a biometric authentication string hidden. In the pulse harmonics, I decrypted a portion of the signal. What I found wasn't language, it was schematics. Fractal blueprints for systems I didn't recognize. 0-point energy stabilization, resonant propulsion, and organic electronic hybrids. This wasn't lost tech. It was an instruction set, a manual of sorts, for building machines we hadn't yet imagined, and Warsit wasn't human in origin. The formatting patterns used prime-based timing loops only seen in deep space transmissions, catalogued by SETI. In 2018, and buried by the NSA shortly after, the vault wasn't a relic. It was a beacon, and someone, or something, was expecting a reply. I returned to land and made preparations to release the data, but the network was already closing in. The barge lab was burned to the waterline. My contact in New Zealand went missing. Every encrypted server I uploaded to was hit with a wave of zero-day exploits within hours. But I had one last card. A passive burst, relay powered by geothermal vent he'd buried off the Kerguelen Plateau. Before going dark, I connected it to a signal repeater that would send everything globally if it lost contact with my personal keycard for more than 72 hours, and then I disappeared. As of June 2025, the Diamantina fracture zone has been closed to all civilian traffic due to tectonic instability. Satellite access over the region has been rerouted. Multiple independent researchers have gone silent. No follow-up reports have surfaced, but the pulse continues. Every 9.8 seconds, on a frequency just beyond military sonar range, the vault still broadcasts, still waiting, still watching. Whatever built it, buried it, and encoded it left one thing behind. A simple truth we've refused to face. The ocean isn't hiding secrets. It is the secret. If this left you questioning what's really beneath the ocean, you're not alone. Hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell, because the deeper we dig, the stranger it gets. And next time, it might be even closer.